Hi, this is Mike Rubel. Again, posting Letter from the Edge number 5. And this one is called What's in a Face? Now, every face has its own characteristics, some more pronounced than others. So if I offend anybody in this letter, I apologize in advance. But anyway, What's in a Face? It begins. The interaction between human beings contains so many variables that one could write volumes on the subject. One small facet of a social conversation is the introduction of some defining and characteristic facial feature, something that is so distinguishing that it is impossible to ignore. For example, upon entering a host's foyer, my companion said, "Oh, that's John's brother in law over there by the patio, and he doesn't know that many people here. Why don't you go over and talk to him? But whatever you do, don't stare at his nose." "Why not?" I asked. "Is there something wrong with it?" "Well," she said conspiratorially, "it's very large and he's quite embarrassed about it." That statement alone is enough to absolutely, without question, force you to look at his nose. In this case, it was quite large, and the end was reddish with a small bump on the right side. It was impossible to look away as much as I tried. Normally, if you look directly in the eyes of the person to whom you're speaking, it avoids those awkward moments, but in the end, it leads you back to the nose. You finally break off the conversation by expressing an urgent need to find the restroom. Once free, you'll find and admonish your companion about the uncomfortable moments looking at Frank's nose. Okay, I'm at a birthday party for a good friend of ours, and one of the attendees was their daughter. She was in her mid to late 30s and had just married an older man in his late 50s, and they wanted me to meet him. Obligingly, I walked across the room and said hello, both to the daughter and then shook hands with the new husband. The first thing that struck me as I looked at his face was a jet black mustache that matched the color of his hair. Surely he had to have some gray there, but it was not evident from my close inspection. The mustache, however, besides being black, was a perfect replica of Hitler's. That did it for me. As we talked, my eyes followed the movement of the mustache as it bounced up and down with each utterance. I don't recall what we discussed because I spent my time concentrating on the Hitler mustache. You wonder what compels a person to, especially an older man, dye his hair such a horrific color and then have a massive mustache to boot. A friend once said that there should be a federal law that every time you exit your house, apartment, hotel room, or whatever, there should be a full length mirror attached to the front door so you can see what you look like before you leave. Several years ago, I met and dated a very nice and attractive woman. She was delightful, but had one huge flaw. Her eye would stray while you looked at her, so it was impossible to look her in the eye, since one was looking one way and the other eyeball was looking elsewhere. It was very disconcerting, to say the least, and she was so nice and about things, and even though I continued to see her until some event which has now slipped my mind, we ended our relationship. Speaking of eyes, when I was an officer in the Navy, I was cognizant of the importance of Chief Petty Officer and their role in running the ship. They were the authority of all things naval, most especially in their field of work. Since I was responsible for supplies, maintenance, food service, ship store, laundry, etc., I had several chiefs working for me. They were instrumental in guiding me through the areas of their expertise in maintaining discipline with the sailors. It was then important to maintain a good relationship with them and have their back as we worked through as a team that affected our duties on board the vessel. That said, I would occasionally meet them at their insistence off duty for a beer. This usually occurred when on a long cruise in a foreign port. It was a new experience for me to see the different part of life ashore than in the officers' club or some fancy restaurant in the city. On one occasion, my chief commissariman and I were having a beer while sitting at the bar. He turned to me and says, "Watch this." And he proceeded to take out his glass eye and place it in his almost empty beer glass. He then called to the bartender and said in horror, "There's an eyeball in my glass. I think I'm going to be sick." The bartender was aghast that such a thing could happen, and he said, "Oh, I'll throw it out and I'll give you another beer on the house." "No, no," my chief said, "just bring me another beer and I'll take care of the eyeball." He would then drink the rest of his beer, including the glass eye, retrieve it out of his mouth, and then he'd replace it in the socket. and to me turns and smiled and said, "Pretty neat, huh?" There's not much you can say to that except stare at the glass eye and laugh. After a good chuckle, I thanked him for the beer and told him I was meeting the rest of the officers who were no doubt drinking martinis or wine in some nice restaurant without any glass eyes. The other day, I ventured into a cell phone store to adjust my phone and review my bill. It was noonish time, and there were other customers ahead of me, so they took my name and said they'd call me soon. I lounged among the various products along the wall while I waited. Shortly thereafter, a man walked in the store, and they took his name as well. He was a wiry build and was completely dressed in black, except for the black and white checkered shirt that was under his black leather vest. I inquired as to how he was doing, and he said he didn't matter. His response was quite fatalistic, and I assured him that there must be something positive in his life. He told me, he says, "No, I've already died twice, so I really didn't care what happened to him. Frankly," he said, "I would just as soon die." He proceeded to tell me that he had died in the battlefield in Vietnam and recalls the rising above his body and watching the corpsmen trying to revive him. He said he was in complete peace and tranquility and didn't want to go back into his body. He felt himself being dragged back into his lifeless form and awoke on a hospital ship somewhere in the South China Sea. So you see, he said, "I don't care." As he spoke, though, as interesting as his story was, I had to look at his mouth and the teeth therein. They were a mixture of gold, silver, enamel, etc. It looked like his dentist ran a machine shop, and these were leftover parts for some fabrication project. I marveled at the placement and structure of his mouth and tried to picture him eating a corn on the cob. It truly was a marvel of dentistry for sure. They called my name, and I bid adieu to my fun-loving acquaintance and engaged in the realm of the phone service. What a face, I guess. Well, apparently there's a great deal in a face. Goodbye.